Have you ever had a feeling that something strange, something inexplicable, was going on around you, but couldn't quite put your finger on it? Imagine, for a moment, that you're living a life, a seemingly normal life, when one day you discover something that shakes the very foundation of everything you've ever known. What if you woke up to a shocking reality that what you believed to be true about yourself wasn't true at all? Now, let's take that one step further. What if you found out that an event, a traumatic, life-changing event, happened to you before you were even born? Sound impossible? Well, buckle up, because in this video, I'm about to take you on a journey that will challenge everything you think you know about time, memory, and the human mind. This story is about a young girl who, in the most bizarre twist of fate, claims she experienced something deeply traumatic, something that should have been impossible, given the timeline of her life. A fire. A deadly, destructive fire. But what if the investigation into this girl's story reveals something that no one could have predicted? That she was somehow connected to this fire before she was born? Now, before you start thinking this is just another wild, made-up story, I urge you to stay with me. Because what you're about to hear isn't just some outlandish claim. It's a real-life mystery that left everyone who investigated it scratching their heads, and it could change everything we know about human memory, reincarnation, or even the idea of fate. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll be questioning everything you thought was possible. But let's rewind for a second. Picture yourself in this girl's shoes for a moment. You're just like anyone else, living your life, going about your days, when one day you start remembering something that doesn't seem to fit. It's not a memory of something you've heard about or something that happened to someone else, it's a vivid, full-on recollection of an experience you couldn't possibly have had. The girl starts describing a fire, a terrifying, chaotic fire. She recalls the smoke, the searing heat, the desperate panic of people trying to escape. She talks about the screams. She talks about seeing the flames, and she is sure, absolutely certain, that she was there. But here's the kicker, this fire was a tragedy that took place decades before she was even born. The events of this fire were well documented, and they left a deep scar on the community. It was a major event that changed lives forever, and this girl, she was claiming to have been right in the middle of it. How could that be? Was she remembering someone else's life? Was it all just an imagination running wild? Or was there something more sinister, something unexplainable going on? As you're hearing this story, I'm sure you're feeling the weight of the mystery, but let me tell you, the deeper you get into this investigation, the more bizarre it becomes. The details she recalls aren't just vague flashes or distorted memories, they're specific, with such eerie accuracy that the people who were involved in the fire are left stunned. How does a little girl, someone who could never have known these things, know about the exact number of victims, the names of people who were there, and even the intricate details about the building's layout that only someone who was actually there would have known? The investigation into this girl's claims started off as a small inquiry by a concerned parent. What started as a curiosity about a child's strange stories quickly turned into something much more unsettling. Experts from all fields, psychologists, historians, even paranormal investigators, began digging into the case, trying to unravel what was going on. Was she experiencing some kind of past life memory? Was she possibly tapping into something that defied science and logic? Or was there something darker at play here, something that no one was ready to confront? But hold on. Before we jump to conclusions, let's pause for a moment and really think about it. How do we explain memories that feel too real to be fake? How do we account for those flashes of the past, those deep, visceral sensations of something we've never actually experienced? What if there's something far beyond our understanding of time and consciousness? What if this girl's experience is proof of something more, something waiting to be uncovered? Something that could change our entire perspective on life, death, and the boundaries of time itself. By now, you're probably wondering, where is this story going? What happened to this girl, and what did the investigation uncover? Is it possible that this girl really lived through an event from a past life? Was there some sort of metaphysical connection to the fire she described, or is this just an incredible coincidence? I know you're craving answers, and trust me, we are going to dive deep into this mystery to find out the truth. But before we do, there's something important I need you to understand. This isn't just about a girl and a fire, this story is about the nature of our memories, our understanding of reality, and what happens when science and the supernatural collide. And in order to get the full picture, you need to stick around, because everything will make sense in the end. But here's the catch, this investigation didn't just uncover secrets about the girl and the fire. It raised even more disturbing questions about what happens when the lines between our past, present, and future start to blur. It seems that this mystery goes much deeper than anyone expected. Stay tuned, because in just a moment, we'll begin the investigation. You'll hear directly from the experts, the eyewitnesses, and those closest to this young girl. You'll be right there as the clues start to unfold, and you'll learn exactly what happened and why it's so much stranger than anyone could have ever imagined. Are you ready for the truth? Trust me, you won't believe what comes next. Stick with me, because the answer to this mystery is waiting, and it's going to change everything. As the investigation into the girl's claims continued to unravel, the more unsettling it became. At first glance, it seemed like a simple case of a child's vivid imagination running wild, or perhaps a strange coincidence. But as the days passed and the details began to pile up, the story began to evolve into something much darker. Her name was Emily, just an ordinary 10-year-old girl from a small town that had seen its fair share of tragedy. But there was nothing ordinary about her story. Emily's life, up until this point, had been marked by an unsettling series of events. For as long as she could remember, she had always been a quiet child, more introverted than most, often lost in her own thoughts, but there was a certain intensity behind her gaze, a sense that she was observing things that no one else could see. Her parents, concerned, thought it was just a phase, something she would grow out of as she got older. But it wasn't just a phase. Emily had always been unusually perceptive, noticing things that no child her age should be aware of. Whether it was an uncanny ability to remember details from stories she'd never heard, or drawing pictures of places she had never visited, it was as though Emily existed in a world that was just a little bit different from everyone else's. Then, a few months ago, it all started to take a strange turn. It began with a recurring nightmare, one that Emily couldn't shake. Each night, she would wake up in a cold sweat, claiming to have seen flames, heard screams, and felt the heat of a fire she couldn't explain. Her parents dismissed it at first, chalking it up to the usual childhood fears, but Emily's recounting of the nightmare was too detailed to ignore. She didn't just describe the fire. She described the feeling of being trapped in it, the sensation of trying to escape, and the image of a building she said she'd never seen before. She talked about the panic, the desperation, the people trying to flee. And the worst part, she described everything as if she had lived it herself, as though she were reliving it in real time. Her parents were understandably concerned. They decided to take her to a therapist, hoping to get to the bottom of her troubling dreams. But the therapy sessions didn't provide the answers they were hoping for. Instead, Emily began to speak more and more about things that didn't fit with her life. She would describe objects she had never encountered, talk about people she had never met, and even mention places she had never visited. And it wasn't just idle chatter, these were details she could not have known unless she had been there. A particular detail stuck with everyone who listened to her story. She spoke about a fire that took place decades before she was born, in a building that no longer existed. She spoke with such clarity and accuracy about the fire that it was hard to dismiss as a child's fantasy. At first, her parents were skeptical, thinking it was just an overactive imagination. But when Emily began to insist, pointing to old family photographs and describing a man in one of them, a man who had died in the fire, their skepticism started to turn into something else. The investigation into Emily's story kicked into full gear when a local historian, hearing about her unusual claims, decided to dig deeper. The fire Emily described was a notorious event that had occurred years before her birth. It had claimed the lives of several people, including a businessman named George Thompson. The fire had been the result of faulty wiring in a building that was once a hub for the local community, a tragedy that had shaped the town's history. The details Emily recounted, details that no child should have been able to know, began to raise questions. How could she possibly know about George Thompson? How could she describe the building with such precision? How could she recall the exact spot where the fire had started, even though there were no records available to the public that gave those specifics? As the investigation gained traction, more strange occurrences began to surface. Emily would sometimes lapse into trances, speaking in a voice that didn't quite sound like hers, recounting experiences of a life she had never lived. And while some people brushed it off as a bizarre form of roleplay, others were starting to believe that there was something more to it. And that's when the red herrings started to appear. There were rumors that Emily's family had a history of mental illness, with some claiming that Emily's vivid memories were simply a manifestation of inherited psychological traits. Her grandmother, for example, had been known for experiencing vivid, recurring dreams of past lives, and some had speculated that Emily might have inherited this gift or affliction. Others pointed to Emily's father, who had a troubled past and had spent years struggling with addiction. Could it be that Emily was just playing out the unresolved trauma she had unknowingly absorbed from her parents' own lives? Was she just reflecting the chaos around her? Or was there something far more profound at work? A twist came when a local investigator named Sarah Martinez, who had worked on several unsolved cases, decided to look into Emily's claims more closely. Sarah was skeptical at first, but something about Emily's description of the fire stuck with her. It was eerily accurate, more so than any other witness report she had ever come across. So Sarah did what any seasoned investigator would do: she started digging into the history of the fire. What she uncovered was chilling. There were inconsistencies in the official reports about the fire. Several survivors of the fire had made statements in the past, claiming to have seen things that didn't make it into the final investigation. Some had mentioned a child, a young girl, who had been trapped in the building, only to mysteriously disappear in the chaos. But there was no record of a child ever being found in the aftermath. What if Emily wasn't just describing a fire she had seen in a dream? What if she had somehow lived through it? Could it be that she had been connected to the fire in some inexplicable way? Could her memories be a glimpse into a past life? The more Sarah looked into the case, the more she realized that this wasn't just a simple case of a girl's overactive imagination. There were too many coincidences, too many strange details that didn't add up. Sarah began to suspect that someone was hiding something, a key piece of information that could unravel the entire mystery. Was it the townspeople who had been keeping secrets for decades? Was it the family? Or was there something supernatural at play here? With each new discovery, the stakes grew higher. And just when it seemed like Sarah was getting closer to uncovering the truth, a new development occurred, one that would throw everything she thought she knew into doubt. Something unexpected, something deeply unsettling. But that, my friends, is where the story gets even more complicated. You see, just when Sarah thought she had the answers, the situation took a turn for the worse. Emily's condition worsened, and the memories became even more vivid, even more real. It wasn't just the fire anymore. She began to describe other events that linked her to people, places, and times no one could explain. And the deeper Sarah dug, the more she realized that she wasn't just investigating a simple case of mistaken memory. She was uncovering something much darker, something much older than Emily. Something that, perhaps, was never meant to be found. But what exactly was that? Keep watching, because what's about to come next will completely blow your mind. The truth is much stranger than anyone could have anticipated. As Sarah Martinez continued her investigation into Emily's strange claims, she quickly realized that she wasn't just dealing with an ordinary mystery, she was diving headfirst into a web of secrets that some people were willing to protect at all costs. Just when Sarah thought she was getting closer to uncovering the truth, the pieces of the puzzle seemed to slip out of her grasp, as if someone or something was trying to keep the past buried. A key piece of evidence, a document that had been vital to connecting the dots between Emily and the fire, mysteriously disappeared. It was a simple but important letter, one written by George Thompson, the businessman who had died in the blaze, his final correspondence that had somehow ended up in the archives of the local history center. Sarah had seen it, had even made a note to follow up with it. But when she went back to the center to retrieve it, it was gone. The staff claimed they had no idea where it had gone, and no one had checked it out or requested it. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. This disappearance wasn't the first strange occurrence to happen during Sarah's investigation, but it was the most unnerving. Someone, or something, was clearly making sure that she didn't uncover the truth. As if that wasn't enough, Sarah began to receive cryptic warnings. First, it was a phone call from an anonymous number, no voice on the other end, just a heavy, breathing silence. Then, a note slipped under her door late one evening that simply read, "Stop. You're going too deep." At first, Sarah thought it was a prank, perhaps someone trying to throw her off track, maybe even one of the locals who didn't want the past to be uncovered. But the more she thought about it, the more uneasy she became. This wasn't a game. This was something far more serious. Whoever was behind these messages didn't want her digging into Emily's past, and they were willing to do whatever it took to make sure she stopped. The tension in the town was palpable. People who had once been open with Sarah about the fire, who had shared their recollections of that fateful night, suddenly grew tight-lipped. The once friendly locals became distant, almost cold. When Sarah approached them, they looked over their shoulders, as if they were afraid of being overheard, afraid of saying too much. One evening, while Sarah was sitting in a diner, trying to piece together some of the facts from old newspaper clippings, a man she had never seen before slid into the seat across from her. He was older, with a weathered face and an aura that suggested he had seen too much for his own good. Without introducing himself, he leaned forward and whispered, "You need to stop asking questions about that fire. There's things you don't understand. Things you can't even begin to understand." His voice was low, gravelly, and he stared at her with eyes that had the weight of years of buried secrets. Before Sarah could respond, he stood up and left as abruptly as he had arrived, leaving her with more questions than answers. But it wasn't just the locals who seemed to be obstructing her investigation. Sarah started to suspect that someone she had trusted was not who they appeared to be. Emily's mother, Jessica, had been one of Sarah's main sources of information early on. She had been open, kind, and seemed genuinely concerned about her daughter's unusual behavior. But as Sarah spent more time investigating, she began to notice strange inconsistencies in Jessica's story. At first, it was small details, little things that didn't quite add up. Jessica had told Sarah that Emily had been adopted, but when Sarah looked into the records, there was no adoption file. When Sarah asked Jessica about it, she grew defensive, brushing off the question with an air of irritation. It wasn't just that Jessica was reluctant to answer, it was the way she reacted. There was a coldness in her tone that hadn't been there before. The warmth she had shown at the beginning of their conversations seemed to evaporate, replaced by something darker, more guarded. And then there was Emily's father, Mark. Mark had always been a shadowy figure in the background, quiet and withdrawn. He had little to say about the fire and seemed almost indifferent to the investigation. But recently, Sarah noticed that whenever she mentioned the fire around him, his face would harden, his jaw would clench, and he would quickly change the subject. It was subtle at first, but it wasn't long before Sarah started to feel like he was hiding something important. She couldn't shake the feeling that Mark might know more than he was letting on. There was a moment, late one evening, when Sarah caught a glimpse of him standing by the front window of his house, staring out into the darkness. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his posture, a tension in the way he held himself, that made Sarah feel like he was waiting for something, or someone. As the investigation wore on, the web of mystery surrounding Emily's past grew tighter, and the obstacles Sarah faced became more menacing. The more she dug, the more she realized that Emily wasn't just a girl with strange dreams, she was a key to something much larger, something dark and unresolved. The deeper Sarah went into the history of the fire, the more she uncovered about the tangled lives of those involved, the lies, the betrayals, the secrets that had been buried for decades. She discovered that George Thompson, the man who had died in the fire, had been involved in a bitter feud with a local business partner just before the blaze. There had been whispers about foul play, about insurance fraud, and about someone who stood to gain from the fire. But no one had ever investigated those claims fully, and the official reports had buried the possibility of foul play beneath a layer of bureaucracy and red tape. The most unsettling discovery, however, came when Sarah uncovered a hidden letter from George Thompson's wife, who had written to a friend shortly before the fire. In it, she spoke of fear that her husband's life was in danger, and that someone close to him was planning something terrible. The letter had been tucked away in an old, dusty archive, hidden behind other files, as though someone had intentionally placed it out of sight. But the question remained, who was trying to bury this evidence, and why? The more Sarah pieced together, the more it became clear that Emily was somehow tied to this fire. But how? Was she the reincarnation of someone who had died that night, or was there something more sinister at play? Was someone using Emily's strange memories to hide the truth? And just when Sarah thought she had a breakthrough, another piece of the puzzle disappeared. Emily's own memories started to shift. The girl, once so sure of her recollections, began to say things that didn't make sense. She described different people, different places, and different events, all of them tied to the fire, but in ways that contradicted the original story. Was Emily losing touch with reality, or was someone manipulating her memories to cover up something far more dangerous? The deeper Sarah dug, the more the line between truth and deception blurred. And with every unanswered question, she found herself trapped in a web of lies, betrayals, and secrets that had been buried for far too long. But just as Sarah was about to confront the one person she suspected had been hiding the most, she received another warning, this time in the form of a letter that changed everything. And what it said? Well, that's where everything gets even more complicated. Shadows seemed to move at the corners of her vision, footsteps echoed behind her on empty streets, and when she turned around, there was no one there. Her nerves were shot, and her mind began to fray under the weight of it all. Was she losing her mind, or was the danger really closing in on her? She couldn't tell anymore. She had never felt so alone, so vulnerable, and she knew that time was running out. She was playing a dangerous game now, one that involved not just uncovering the truth, but surviving long enough to tell it. It was in the dead of night, when Sarah was sitting in her apartment, reviewing her notes one last time before calling it a night, that something finally snapped. There was a loud knock at her door, 3 heavy, deliberate thuds. Her heart skipped a beat as she froze in place. Who could it be at this hour? The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she approached the door cautiously. She looked through the peephole but saw nothing. The hallway outside was empty, eerily so. But then, a small, crumpled piece of paper was slipped under the door. Sarah bent down to pick it up, her hands trembling. It was a note, but this one wasn't like the others. This one had a single sentence, written in block letters, as if the writer was afraid someone might recognize their handwriting. You've been warned. Leave before it's too late. Fear clutched at Sarah's chest as she read the note again, her thoughts racing. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was a threat. A promise. Whoever was behind this was not going to stop until they had silenced her, and perhaps Emily, forever. The walls around her felt like they were closing in. Her mind was a blur of frantic thoughts, but one thing was clear. She had no choice but to continue, to unravel the mystery, no matter what the cost. But now, as the reality of the danger hit her, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was running out of time. Emily was still missing, and with each passing hour, the chances of finding her seemed slimmer. Sarah had no idea where to turn next, but she knew one thing: if she didn't act fast, she might lose everything she had fought for. She couldn't help but think of the people who had disappeared, of the twisted path she had followed to get this far. The fire had been a lie, a carefully crafted story meant to cover up something darker. But the truth was out there, somewhere, buried beneath the ashes. The deeper Sarah dug, the more dangerous it became. And now, she couldn't tell if the danger was from the people she had trusted or from something much more sinister. Either way, it was clear she was in over her head. The clock was ticking, and every second that passed made the danger feel more immediate. If Sarah didn't find Emily, if she didn't uncover the truth, she knew there would be no coming back from this. But the question remained: who was pulling the strings? And how far were they willing to go to keep their secret buried? Stay with me, because the darkness is just beginning to unfold, and the answers you're looking for, they might be more terrifying than you could ever imagine. Just when Sarah thought she had reached the darkest point of the investigation, when everything seemed to be unraveling at the seams, a single moment completely shattered her perception of the entire mystery. The pieces of the puzzle had been scattered for so long, but it wasn't until the phone call, an unexpected call, that she realized she had been seeing it all wrong. It was late at night, the city outside her window a blur of neon lights and the constant hum of distant traffic, when the phone rang. It wasn't the usual anonymous number or the threatening voice she had grown accustomed to, it was Emily. Her heart skipped a beat. Emily, the girl at the center of it all, had finally called. Sarah quickly answered, almost desperate to hear her voice. But the girl on the other end wasn't the one Sarah had known. Emily's voice was strained, flat, as if she were speaking from a great distance, disconnected from everything around her. "Sarah, you don't know who I am, do you?" Emily's words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "Of course, I do, Emily. I've been trying to find you." But Emily interrupted, her voice growing more distant with each word. "I'm not the girl you think I am. I'm not who you've been looking for." Sarah froze. Her heart pounded in her chest. What was she talking about? Everything she had been doing, all the digging, all the sleepless nights, had been for nothing? Sarah felt a rush of confusion, a sense of panic creeping up her spine. "What do you mean, Emily? Please, I need you to explain." But there was no explanation. The call abruptly ended, and all Sarah could hear was the faint hum of the line. She sat there for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She couldn't get the sound of Emily's voice out of her head, how disconnected she sounded, how strange her words had been. Sarah tried to call her back, but there was no answer. Nothing. In the following days, things only became more bizarre. The next piece of the puzzle fell into place when Sarah received an anonymous tip, another cryptic message, one that would lead her into an entirely new direction. This time, the tip came in the form of an old newspaper article, one buried deep in a pile of documents she'd forgotten about. It was an article from years ago, dated just a few months before the fire, and it had an innocuous headline, "Local Teen Found Alive After House Fire." The article was brief, but it mentioned a girl, an unnamed girl who had been rescued from a house fire. There was a blurry photograph accompanying the story, a dark-haired girl in a hospital bed, a bandage wrapped around her head. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the image. The girl in the photo looked eerily familiar. It was Emily. The realization hit Sarah like a freight train. The girl she had been searching for, the girl who had claimed to have memories of the fire, the girl whose every step she had followed wasn't the same person at all. This was someone who had been in the fire years before, someone who had miraculously survived, but had somehow disappeared from the world for years. And yet, Emily had been living in plain sight, growing up, creating new memories, even though she wasn't who Sarah thought she was. The girl Sarah had been working with, had been trying to protect, had been someone else entirely, an imposter. But how? How had Emily become this person? And why hadn't anyone said anything? The town, the police, everyone around her had kept quiet for so long, covering up something so dark, so twisted, that Sarah couldn't wrap her mind around it. Was Emily an experiment? Was she a product of someone's plan, someone's hidden agenda? The questions spiraled, and the answers seemed impossible to find. But just as the confusion began to cloud her mind, another shocking revelation hit Sarah. A trusted source, someone she had relied on throughout the investigation, reached out with information that turned everything she thought she knew upside down. It was Jessica, Emily's mother. Sarah had always thought Jessica was a victim in all of this, someone caught up in a tragic situation beyond her control. But now, Sarah was starting to wonder if that had all been a lie. Jessica revealed something so shocking, so unbelievable, that Sarah couldn't even begin to process it. "Emily isn't my daughter," Jessica admitted in a hushed voice over the phone, her words trembling with fear. "She never was. I don't know who she is, Sarah. But she's not the girl I raised. And the fire wasn't an accident." Sarah's mind went numb. "What do you mean, it wasn't an accident?" she asked, barely able to find the words. Jessica's voice broke as she continued. "I thought I could keep it buried, but now you've dug it all up. The truth is, Emily wasn't supposed to survive that fire. She wasn't supposed to be alive. But when I found her, when I found this girl who looked just like her, who had the same memories, the same scars, I couldn't leave her. I thought it was a miracle. But now, I don't know what to believe anymore." Jessica's confession shattered Sarah's world. Everything she had assumed about Emily's life, about the people around her, about the fire, was suddenly in question. The girl she had been protecting, the girl she thought was so central to the truth, was someone else entirely, someone with a hidden past, a past that was now threatening to expose everything. The fire wasn't an accident. Emily wasn't Emily. And Jessica wasn't telling the full story. As Sarah sat in stunned silence, trying to process what Jessica had just revealed, another call came in. It was from a blocked number, the voice on the other end unfamiliar but cold. "Stop digging, Sarah. You've uncovered the truth, and now you've become a liability. If you don't walk away, you'll regret it. You're not the first person to get too close, and you won't be the last." The call ended abruptly, leaving Sarah shaken and filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. Everything had changed. The investigation had turned from a search for truth into a battle for survival. And now, with the layers of deception peeling away, Sarah realized she was no longer just uncovering the past, she was caught in a web of lies, betrayal, and manipulation, where no one was who they seemed. The stakes had been raised higher than ever, and Sarah was in deeper than she could have ever imagined. The real question now was, who was behind all of this? And why had they gone to such lengths to bury the truth? As Sarah stumbled through the crumbling maze of lies that had led her to this point, the weight of her investigation grew heavier with each passing day. The discovery that Emily wasn't who she thought she was had left her feeling unmoored, lost in a sea of confusion and mistrust. The stakes had never been higher, her own safety was now on the line, and she had no way of knowing who she could trust. She had spent so much time focused on the fire, on Emily, on uncovering the truth, but now she realized that the very people she'd relied on, the people she'd trusted the most, might be just as involved in this tangled web of deception as the people who'd been threatening her. It was one quiet evening when Sarah received a message that seemed to pull the rug out from under her. It wasn't a threat this time, or a cryptic note left on her doorstep, but a phone call, a call from Jessica. Sarah had barely spoken to her motherly figure in days, too wrapped up in the mystery, but now, as Jessica's number flashed across her phone screen, she felt a familiar knot twist in her stomach. Maybe she could finally get some answers. She answered quickly, holding her breath in anticipation. But Jessica's voice, when it came, was tinged with something that made Sarah's blood run cold. There was no comfort in it, no sign of the reassuring, supportive woman Sarah had known for so long. Instead, Jessica sounded almost desperate. "Sarah, you need to stop. Please. I know you're trying to protect Emily, but you don't understand what you're dealing with. This isn't just about her anymore. It's bigger than that." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to make sense of what Jessica was saying. She felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "What do you mean? What's going on, Jessica?" Her voice trembled, and she could hear her own panic rising as she tried to keep it together. "Listen to me," Jessica continued, her voice quivering with a mixture of fear and something else, something dark. "I didn't want you to know this, but I can't keep it from you anymore. I was involved in the fire. I wasn't just a victim. I was part of it. Everything you've been digging into, it's all connected, Sarah. And if you keep pushing, if you keep digging into the past, you'll be putting everyone you love in danger. Not just Emily, but you too. Please, for your own safety, stop." The words struck Sarah like a physical blow, and for a moment, she couldn't even breathe. She stumbled back, her vision swimming as she processed what Jessica had just revealed. Her mind raced, trying to grasp the enormity of it. Jessica, Emily's mother, the woman who had always been so kind, so supportive, was involved in the fire. She wasn't just a bystander. She had known more than she had ever let on, and now she was warning Sarah to back off before it was too late. But why? Why hadn't Jessica told her the truth from the beginning? Why had she allowed Sarah to get this deep into something so dangerous? The phone call ended abruptly, and Sarah was left in stunned silence, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. The secrets that had been buried so deeply, the things she had trusted to be true, had all crumbled in an instant. What was she supposed to do now? She had already uncovered so much, but the idea of stopping felt like surrender, like letting everything she had fought for slip through her fingers. But if she kept going, if she pushed any further, there was no telling what would happen next. Jessica's warning, desperate as it was, carried a chilling weight. How far was she willing to go to uncover the truth? How far was she willing to risk everything? And then, as if the universe were intent on throwing every obstacle in her way, another twist of fate came barreling toward her. The very next day, she received an unexpected visit, one that would make her question not only her choices, but her very sense of reality. The man standing in front of her apartment door was someone she recognized immediately, Nathan, her former colleague at the local news station. He had been an ally early on in her investigation, someone who had helped her get access to files, someone who had offered her advice when things seemed too much to handle. But now, standing before her, Nathan looked different. His eyes were hard, his face drawn with stress, and the familiar warmth she had once felt toward him was replaced by something colder, more calculating. "Sarah," Nathan said, his voice low, "you don't understand what you're doing. This investigation, it's spiraling out of control. To warn you, but you didn't listen. You've uncovered something you weren't supposed to. Now, you're a liability. And if you don't walk away right now, you'll regret it. You're in too deep." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The words felt like a slap, each one landing heavier than the last. Nathan, the man she had trusted, was now threatening her. Was he involved in this whole web of lies? She had always thought of him as someone on her side, but now, with his cold demeanor and ominous words, she wasn't so sure anymore. "Don't you dare threaten me," Sarah snapped, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "I'm not backing down. I'm going to finish this. I need to know the truth." Nathan's eyes flickered, almost with regret, before he spoke again. "You think you're looking for the truth. The fire was never an accident. And Emily, she wasn't the only one involved. There are others, many others, who have been part of a much larger plan. A plan that goes back decades." Sarah's blood ran cold as she scanned the pages. The photographs showed people she recognized, people she had trusted, people who had seemed so ordinary, so unremarkable. But in each of them, there was a connection to the fire, to the conspiracy. The pieces of the puzzle she had been piecing together all this time, they weren't just random connections. They were all part of a much larger web, and the fire, the one that had set everything in motion, was only the beginning. The names, the faces, the dates, everything was linked, and it was all being orchestrated by people in positions of power, people who had manipulated her every step of the way. As the reality of what she was seeing hit her, Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her. She had thought she was in control, thought she was the one uncovering the truth, but now she realized she had been a pawn in someone else's game all along. Nathan wasn't just a trusted ally. He was a player, a part of the conspiracy. And the file he had shown her wasn't just a collection of facts, it was evidence of a plan that went far beyond the fire and Emily. This was about covering up decades of corruption, of manipulating events and people to keep the truth buried. She took a step back, her mind spinning as the weight of the revelation crashed down on her. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice barely a whisper as she tried to gather her thoughts. "Why are you showing me this?" Nathan didn't hesitate. "Because, Sarah, you have a choice to make. You've always had a choice. But now it's a matter of survival. You can walk away, leave all of this behind, and you'll be safe. You'll be free. Or you can keep fighting, keep digging, and we'll make sure you don't get out of here alive. The choice is yours." His words hung in the air like a threat, cold and final. And for the first time, Sarah truly understood the magnitude of what she was facing. The conspiracy was bigger than she had ever imagined, and now, with Nathan standing before her, with the weight of the truth crashing down on her, she was caught in a trap with no easy way out. Every choice she made now would have consequences. She could either live with the knowledge that she had abandoned the truth, or she could face whatever came next, no matter the cost. As Nathan stepped closer, as the two masked figures closed in around her, Sarah felt the walls closing in. She was no longer the one in control. The truth, the one she had chased for so long, had become a weapon, and she was now its target. The tension in the old mill was palpable, thick with the weight of unanswered questions and unspeakable truths. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest as she stood face to face with Nathan and the two masked figures, the oppressive silence only broken by the creaking of the rotting wooden beams overhead. The entire room seemed to close in on her, the air heavy, charged with danger. Her mind raced, each thought tangled in confusion, anger, and fear. She had come here looking for answers, but now, standing in the center of it all, she wasn't sure what she was about to uncover or if she even wanted to know anymore. The revelations had come so fast, so brutally, that the ground beneath her feet no longer felt stable. Nathan's voice cut through the suffocating silence, calm, almost too calm. "You were never meant to get this far, Sarah," he said, his words like a cold gust of wind, chilling her to the bone. "You've gotten too close, and now the consequences are much bigger than you realize." He stepped closer, his eyes cold and unyielding. The fire wasn't an accident. Emily wasn't just a victim, she was part of something much darker. "But you, Sarah, you're the real threat. You know too much now, and we can't let you walk away from this. Not after everything you've uncovered." Sarah's thoughts were spinning. She had suspected it all along, but hearing Nathan say it so plainly made her feel like the floor had been ripped out from under her. She was standing at the edge of a cliff, and there was no way back. The fire, Emily, the strange messages, it was all connected, and the people she had trusted, people she had let into her life, were part of a much larger conspiracy. But why? What did they want from her? What was the endgame? Before she could speak, the masked figures behind Nathan took a step forward, blocking her escape. The looming presence of their silent threat was too much to ignore, and for the first time since she had started this investigation, Sarah felt a cold, creeping sense of dread wash over her. She was cornered, with no way out and no clear path forward. The truth was too much for her to bear alone, and now, she had to face the consequences of what she had unearthed. "Why, Nathan?" she whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay composed. "Why all of this? What is it you're really after? You've ruined so many lives, why not just leave me alone?" Nathan's lips curled into a thin smile, one that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was never about ruining lives. It was about control. About keeping certain things buried. "We can't let people like you disrupt the balance of things. You think you're saving Emily, but she was never meant to be saved. She was always part of the plan. Just like you were, Sarah." He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. "Everything you've done, everything you've uncovered, it was all by design. You've been playing right into our hands." Her chest tightened, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She felt betrayed on a level she couldn't even begin to process. Everything she had worked for, every step she had taken in pursuit of the truth, had been manipulated, orchestrated by people she thought she could trust. Emily, Jessica, Nathan, they were all part of it. But why? What was the bigger picture? Why drag her into this? And then, just when Sarah thought she couldn't take any more, Nathan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "It's not just about Emily, or the fire. It's about something far more important. It's about controlling the future. The fire was just a catalyst, a way to bring all of this together." He paused, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "And you, Sarah, you're the final piece. You were always meant to be the one to expose it, the one to bring it all to light. That's why we had to keep you on the trail. That's why we made sure you found those files. You were the one who was going to reveal everything, and we needed you to do that. We needed you to be the one who connected the dots." Her mind reeled. This was a game, a twisted, dangerous game where she had been nothing but a pawn. And now, as she stood there in the dim light of the mill, the pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fall into place. But it wasn't over yet. She wasn't ready to give up, not when she was so close to the truth. Just as Sarah was about to respond, there was a sudden loud crash. The door to the mill slammed open, and a figure rushed in, a familiar face that sent a wave of shock through Sarah's body. It was Jessica. But she wasn't alone. She was dragging Emily behind her, and the sight of her daughter's pale face, her wide, terrified eyes, made Sarah's heart lurch in her chest. "Sarah, get out of here," Jessica shouted, her voice panicked. "You have to go, now. You don't know what you're dealing with. But I know this, there are people with connections, powerful people who will stop at nothing to protect their secrets. They have eyes everywhere. They've been watching us this whole time, and they'll do whatever it takes to keep everything hidden." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. The conspiracy, the cover-up, everything she had fought for, it was bigger than she had ever imagined. There was no escaping it now. It wasn't just the town, it wasn't just the fire, it was a network of power and deceit that stretched far beyond anything Sarah had ever anticipated. And then, as if to seal the weight of Jessica's revelation, there was a sudden flash of movement outside the window. Sarah turned instinctively, her heart pounding in her chest. A shadow, just outside the glow of the porch light, flickered for a moment before disappearing into the night. Her breath caught in her throat. She had been followed. Again. Jessica saw the look on her face and stood up, her expression hardening. "They're still watching. We're not free, Sarah. Not yet. But we can't stop now. Not after everything we've uncovered." The finality in Jessica's voice sent a chill through Sarah. She knew what this meant. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. As the night stretched on, Sarah sat in silence, her mind racing with everything she had learned. The truth was out there, but it came at a price, and the cost had been far higher than she ever imagined. In the end, there would be no simple resolution, no clear path forward. The answers she sought would always be clouded by shadows, by the constant lurking threat of those who would do anything to keep their secrets safe. And though Emily was safe, though she had found some peace, Sarah knew that her life had been forever changed by the truth, and that truth would always haunt her, would always push her forward, forcing her to keep searching for the parts of the puzzle that were still missing. As she looked out the window, her gaze following the path where the shadow had vanished, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't over. There was something still out there, something waiting, something much larger than she could ever imagine. And as much as she wanted to walk away, to let it all go and live in peace, she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't. Not now. Not after everything. The darkness wasn't finished with her, and as much as she tried to outrun it, she knew it would always find a way to drag her back in. And with that, the story lingered in Sarah's mind, the haunting truth of what she had uncovered still echoing in the quiet corners of her thoughts, waiting for the next chapter to unfold.